Hello my friends and welcome to the pre-patch. Welcome back to the channel. This is Thordranik here and today we are doing a Fury Warrior patch 8.0 survival guide. So the changes have been made to the game. They are all in. Our artifacts are no more. RIP artifacts. But the class changes have made their way into the game, and Fury is looking really good, really fun, and really strong. So let's talk about those changes in this brief survival guide so that we can see what we're going to be playing with and how we're going to be playing. Now, the core rotation, the core gameplay of Fury hasn't changed all that much going from Legion into Battle for Azeroth. We still work to build up our rage, to dump in a rampage, to spend on rampage. We no longer spend on execute. We'll talk about that shortly, but you have that gameplay of building up your rage to spend on rampage and then building it up again and trying to hit as many rampages as we can so that we can maintain a high in rage uptime, and also because rampage hits like a train right now on live. So let's take a look at the spellbook and see what exactly has changed. First of all, let's talk about Enrage. Enrage has changed a little bit. There are some significant changes to it, actually. So it still increases your damage done based on your mastery, and it increases your haste now instead of your attack speed. Your haste by 25%. This is absolutely huge. Instead of increasing your attack speed, which is a nice little passive rage bonus, it now increases your haste, which not only increases your attack speed, but also reduces your global cooldown and reduces the cooldown of Bloodthirst, Raging Blow, and Execute, which are core rotational abilities that all build rage to spend on another rampage. So while you have Enrage up, all those cooldowns are charging faster, which helps you get to your next Enrage window faster and really gives us a very satisfying gameplay. In addition to that, it increases your movement speed by 10%. And what does it no longer do? It no longer increases our damage taken. This is a big survivability buff for Fury. How do we get Enraged then? Well, Rampage still always enrages us, and you'll see here Bloodthirst now has a 30% chance to enrage you. This is independent from crit, so you no longer have to have crits from Bloodthirst to enrage you. It now just has a static 30% chance. There's a talent that buffs that. We'll talk about it when we get to the talent tree, but that's Enrage. And this is the core mechanic that we are working with as Fury. We're trying to get as many rampages as we can to get as many enrage windows as we can to do the most damage that we can. So rampage is pretty much the same. You'll see it costs 75 rage. That's because of a talent that I've taken, but it hits like a truck. Just to give you an idea, so I left my damage meter up here. I did a couple of fights in a normal Antorus run just to get a feel for how the changes are going, and Rampage was 32% of my damage on one of these fights. If I switch to, this is the overall. So overall, 32% of my total damage in the time that I was in that raid. I think I just did like one fight. I just did High Council and then some trash, but still 32% of my overall damage taken. The next on the list is melee, just auto attacks at 12%. So Rampage is a massive portion of our damage, and we want to get as many of those as possible, and that's going to affect the build that we're going to be running with the talents. But let's talk about the other changes that we have first. The mastery is unchanged. It still increases our damage done while we're enraged. Whirlwind is a little bit different. It is now our filler ability in both single target and AoE. It generates 3 rage plus 1 per target hit, up to 8 total rage, and it causes your next 2 single target attacks. So this is no longer relegated to just Bloodthirst and Rampage, just your next 2 single target attacks to cleave 4 targets for 50% damage. So you can use this on Execute, you can use this on Raging Blow, or you could still use it on Rampage, you could still use it on Bloodthirst. It gives you a lot more flexibility, and because it affects your next 2 attacks, it makes the AoE or cleave rotation for Fury much more smooth and satisfying to play with. Victory Rush has returned for Fury. This isn't going to see a whole lot of usage in raids probably. You don't have to get the killing blow, you just have to be damaging the enemy during its dying second or two. But it does give you a nice little heal in open world content that'll be particularly useful for Fury in PvP scenarios. If you've got 2 targets on you and you are able to kill one of them, then you can heal up 20% for the next target to take him down. The next change is to recklessness. This has received a huge change. So, just as a reminder, the core gameplay of the Fury Warrior is to build up rage to spend on Rampage. So recklessness now works directly toward that goal by giving you 100% increased rage generation for 10 seconds, and it gives you 20% increased crit on top of that, just for some flavor and for some additional damage. But that rage generation is what we're really going to be concerned with while we are using recklessness, because it's going to allow you to use Rampage sometimes every other global cooldown, depending on how much rage you have when you pop recklessness and what you're able to use to generate rage. It'll give you a ton of rampages during that recklessness window, which gives you more and more damage because rampage is such a significant portion of our damage. Rallying Cry is still here. Raging Blow has actually received a little bit of a change, so it no longer requires Enrage to be up to work. It can be used anytime you want to. It has 2 charges on a cooldown that's reduced by haste. So with my current gear, I believe it's like an 8%, maybe a 9, or maybe an 8 or a 9 second cooldown by default. I have 27% haste. That brings it down to a 6.3 second recharge. Yeah, and it generates 12 rage, and it has a 20% chance to instantly reset its own cooldown, which gives it a nice little RNG aspect to the spec that wasn't really there before. But that's Raging Blow, the new Raging Blow. Most of the stuff on this page is the same, but we'll talk about a couple of differences here. First of all, Battle Shout is back. It increases attack power for all party and raid members for 1 hour, so be sure you're popping that. One thing I'm going to do is create just a big fat weak aura that'll show me when I don't have this buff active on my warrior, because it is returned for all 3 specs. It's one of just a few raid buffs that ended up making it back into the game, but Battle Shout is going to be a nice DPS buff, especially in melee heavy groups. And then Execute has changed quite significantly for Fury. So the execute gameplay in Legion was just spam execute as much as you can when you're in the execute phase, because we wanted to get those juggernaut stacks and get the damage of execute just ramping up and up and up and up as high as we could before the boss died. Well, going into the core gameplay of Fury for Battle for Azeroth, execute has been changed from a spammy spender to a short cooldown rage generator. So it now generates 20 rage. It's by default usable on enemies that have less than 20% health. You see 35% in my spellbook because of a talent that I have again. It has a 6-second cooldown that's reduced by haste, so you can't really spam it, but that does play into the rotation really, really nicely. So those are, I believe, all of the base toolkit changes to Fury. So let's take a look at the talents. So this is, we'll just drop the PvP talents menu, we'll talk about those in a minute. This is probably roughly the basic spec that we're going to be going with. So again, when we're looking at this entire thing, you need to keep that core gameplay in mind. What gets me more rampages? What gets me more rage to get those rampages? And what allows me to get more of those in there? Because it's our hardest hitting ability, and it gives us enrage, which makes everything else that we do hit harder as well. So on tier 15, Fresh Meat, Bloodthirst has a 15% chance to trigger Enrage, 15% increased. So this gives a 45% chance when you Bloodthirst to get Enrage, and heals you for 20% more. This will give you a slightly higher uptime on Enrage, but we already have a really high uptime on Enrage, and most of it is coming from Rampage, not from Bloodthirst. So Fresh Meat is kind of meh out of the box, especially when you compare it to the other talents on this row. Endless Rage, you gain 6 rage whenever you're in rage. So every time you hit Rampage, or every time Bloodthirst procs Enrage, you gain 6 rage. So this is directly giving you more rampages, and during that battle cry window, this is going to give you, 12 rage, so that's even more significant. This is getting you to that next rampage that much faster. And then we got War Machine, which causes your auto attacks to generate 10% more rage, and killing an enemy generates 10 rage and increases your movement speed by 30% for 8 seconds. Now, if you're in a scenario where you're killing a lot of adds really quickly, kind of all the time, War Machine is probably going to pass endless rage on total rage generation in that case. But for the most part, for single target raid encounters or for dungeon bosses, not necessarily trash, but bosses, endless rage is going to be pulling ahead on this row, getting us more rampages, which is what we're all working towards as Fury Warriors. But, you know, there's some choice between these two. They're going to be pretty close. Endless Rage is slightly ahead, but War Machine has a lot of uses. It has a lot of scenarios where you can really make use of it. If you're doing Mythic Plus and you're killing a lot of trash mobs and, you know, the trash is really what's important for meeting the timer, plot twist, not really, that's been the case the whole expansion, then War Machine can help with that because you're killing mobs pretty frequently. It gives you more movement speed. But between these two, you're going to be choosing between these two and probably ignoring Fresh Meat unless it gets a buff or unless Bloodthirst becomes more important. Tier 30, this is mostly utility here. I'm going to go with Stormbolt by default unless the movement from Double Time is really needed or the heal from Impending Victory is really needed. But I think Stormbolt is the only stun you have access to as a DPS warrior now. We no longer have Shockwave, so I think that stun is going to be really useful whenever we have the opportunity to stun targets. On Tier 45, Inner Rage reduces the cooldown of Raging Blow by 1 second and increases its damage, so this doesn't give you a whole lot of extra rage generation, especially compared to these other two abilities. So, just in the gameplay that I've done so far, I haven't really had a lot of times where I wanted to use Raging Blow and it wasn't already available. And if you do have a moment like that, you can always use Whirlwind, or Bloodthirst might be available because it's got such a short cooldown, or you might already have enough rage to hit Rampage. So I don't think Inner Rage is going to end up giving us many more uses of Raging Blow during a fight, even though Raging Blow is a 12 rage generator, especially when we compare it to Sudden Death, which gives your attacks a chance to proc a free execute. Well, all executes for Fury are free now, but to proc and execute, reset the cooldown, and allow you to use it on any target regardless of their current health. This is a huge ability because execute hits really hard. It hits almost as hard as Enrage. Well, 3,000 damage to 3,600 damage, so it hits almost as hard as Rampage does, and it generates 20 rage, which gets you more than a quarter of a Rampage if you're taking Carnage, which we'll talk about when we get down there. So Sudden Death is probably going to be your go-to in this row. Furious Slash is also decent in single target encounters. As soon as there's any cleave introduced, Furious Slash becomes really awkward to deal with because you have to worry about trying to weave in Whirlwind and Furious Slash, and then you start to lose uses of Bloodthirst, uses of Raging Blow, uses of Execute. You might even get to the point where you're overcapping on Rage, which means you're using less Rampages. So anytime there's more than one target, then Sudden Death is definitely going to win out over Furious Slash. But the haste buff that you get from Furious Slash is nice in single target, and it does generate 4 rage. Now, note that 4 rage is the same that you'll get from Whirlwind on a single target encounter, but the haste can kind of move things along a little bit faster. Personally, I think I'm going to be going with Sudden Death unless it gets, nerfed into the ground. It seems to work with the rotation a lot better. It gives you another really nice proc to get, and it's just a good talent overall. Tier 60, we've got mobility, healing, and damage reduction. So Bounding Stride is really strong. It not only allows you to heroic leap more, but gives you a sprint whenever you heroic leap. If you need the damage reduction, you can take Warpaint, which gives you 10% reduced damage while Enrage is active. We have a really high uptime on Enrage, and getting that damage reduction makes it a really strong survivability tool. And then Furious Charge is going to give you a big heal from your next Bloodthirst after you charge. So this is more of an open world questing talent. Yeah. So just choose what you need between mobility, healing, or straight up damage reduction in this row. Tier 75, I've got Massacre from the Soul of the Battlelord ring, but what it does is it allows you to use Execute on targets that are below 35% in health instead of 20% health. So this almost doubles the Execute window on encounters. Really nice talent to have. But if I didn't have it from the ring, I would probably still be taking Carnage because of a couple of reasons. First of all, Carnage reduces the rage cost of Rampage, which allows us to get more Rampages in, and it causes Rampage to deal 15% increased damage. That's 15% damage on what is already our hardest hitting ability. This has a particularly strong synergy with, I'll just bring up the character window here, with the tier 21, whatever it is, the Taurus tier set bonuses, which cause Rampage to deal essentially 18% additional damage on that bleed over 4 seconds, and then another 15% damage. So stack all these together and Rampage becomes even just that much more powerful. So Carnage is a really strong ability, and I think it's going to be the go-to, at least in the pre-patch, and probably for the opening portion of Battle for Azeroth proper. Frothing Berserker has been made a little more quality of life friendly, and now instead of forcing you to cap on rage, it now causes Rampage to cost 10 more rage than it does by default, but it also gives you a 10% damage buff and a 5% haste buff for 6 seconds. Now this does have some synergy with some other talents. One of them would be with Furious Slash. If you're running both of these together, that's 11% haste that you'll get from maintaining the Furious Slash buff and from maintaining the Frothing Berserker buff. So that's pretty nice, but I think Carnage wins because it gives us harder hitting Rampage and it gives us more overall Rampages. Tier 90, we've got Meat Cleaver, which causes Whirlwind to have a very small 10% chance to enrage you, and then gives you a little bit more rage from using it. So this is going to be okay in cleave scenarios. It'll maybe give you a little more enrage uptime, but ultimately Dragon's Roar and Bladestorm are much stronger abilities. Now Dragon's Roar is essentially the successor to Odin's Fury, Rip Odin's Fury, but we do have Dragon's Roar. It's a 35-second cooldown. It only takes 1 global cooldown. It's instant, and it deals pretty strong physical damage to all enemies that are around you. Excuse me, sorry, apologize for that break. It gives you really strong physical damage to all enemies within 12 yards and gives you a snare on a 35-second cooldown. Bladestorm is a 1-minute cooldown. It is now a short enough duration that you can cover the entirety of it with Enrage, and it gives you that immune to movement impairing effects. It allows you to use defensive abilities, and it generates 25 rage over the duration. Dragon's Roar generates 10 rage. Now, if you balance these out, Bladestorm has slightly more rage generation, but it does have a longer cooldown, so that's, you're going to get a little bit more rage from Bladestorm, but you can use other abilities during that window with Dragon's Roar. Both of these are strong AoE abilities. Bladestorm has some good synergy with Frothing Berserker and Siegebreaker, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But I think for the most part, especially on single target encounters, Dragon Roar is going to be your go-to, and you'd use it sort of like how you would have used Odin's Fury. You're going to use it while you're enraged. Don't have to worry about fitting it in the Recklessness window because it's not 100% crit chance anymore. But you'll just want to make sure that you enrage and then pop Dragon's Roar, and you'll be good to go with that talent. Tier 100, we've got Reckless Abandon, which functions very similar to how it did. Causes Recklessness to generate 100 rage and lasts 4 seconds longer. So this gives you a lot more bursty DPS while Recklessness is up. But on the other hand, we've got Anger Management, which gets you more Recklessness windows during any given encounter. So for every 20 rage you spend, you reduce the remaining cooldown of Recklessness by a second. So every time you pop Rampage with Carnage, you're going to be taking almost 4 seconds off of the cooldown of Recklessness. This is a pretty big deal. This gives you, in my testing so far, something like a 50-second, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more cooldown on Recklessness. Very strong ability to make use of there. Siegebreaker gives you sort of a Colossus Smash window. Now it generates 10 rage and it increases the damage you do to the target by 15% for 10 seconds. Now, one thing that you need to know is that this is a single target ability. So this can be used in conjunction with the Whirlwind Cleave. So if you take Siegebreaker with Bladestorm and Frothing Berserker, you can do something like Whirlwind, Siegebreaker, Rampage, Bladestorm, and then you will have a super buffed Bladestorm that's dealing ridiculous amounts of damage to the targets during its channel because it's buffed by Enrage, it's buffed by the 10% damage from Frothing Berserker, it's buffed by the 10% damage from Siegebreaker, and all those things go together to give you just a massive amount of burst AoE damage. So if you're in a situation where every minute you need that burst AoE damage, then these are going to be really strong talents to go for. But overall, I've been able to do some pretty strong cleave damage using Anger Management with Dragon's Roar and Carnage, and I like the way those talents play together. Let's talk about the PvP talents before we just go attack a dummy and kind of demonstrate how fast this spec is moving these days. So the three that I have that I'm taking right now are Spell Reflection. You guys know what that's about. Barbarian, which is a little bit different from how it is in Legion. In Legion, it gave us 3 charges of Heroic Leap. In BFA, it's giving us 2 Heroic Leaps within 3 seconds before the cooldown kicks in. So still pretty strong, not quite as strong if you need all 3 leaps. Like let's say you pick up a flag and you want to get out of the flag room, then Barbarian would have been a little bit stronger previously. But overall, pretty strong mobility tool. And then Death Sentence, which gives you the execute charge. Most of the others are pretty much the same. Master and Commander gives you 1 minute commanding shout. Disarm is, you disarm your enemy for 4 seconds. Death Wish works the same way. You sacrifice some of your health and you gain a damage buff. It is less of your health, I think. I think it was 10% in Legion, now it's 5%. But you still gain that 5% damage buff, stacking up to 10 times. Enduring Rage is a little bit different, but it has the same effect overall of pretty much giving you permanent Enrage uptime. You just have to work for it a little bit more. The way that it works now is it increases your Enrage by 1 second and then causes Raging Blow to give you an additional 1.5 seconds on that Enrage timer. So instead of just refreshing the duration of Enrage, now Enduring Rage is going to just give you a little bit longer. But because of the way these talents work, you're pretty easily going to be getting to your next rampage during that, what would that be, 6.5 seconds that you'd have from using 1 Raging Blow in that window. So essentially the same result, you just have to work a little bit more for it, which is totally fine. We've got Thirst for Battle, Bloodthirst clears snares, Battle Trance. If you Raging Blow the same target twice, you get this heal and rage generation buff. And then Slaughterhouse, which causes Bloodthirst to deal more damage the lower health a target has, and reduces its cooldown. So yeah, those are the PvP talents. That's the talent tree. We already looked at the spellbook. This video is getting a little bit long, but I'll just go ahead and wail on this level 85 training dummy for a minute just to kind of show how things are working here. So you can see I'm not even really using any abilities yet, and we're already just getting into our second rampage. Here's Dragon's Roar, so you can see lots of damage. These numbers are super inflated because this dummy's only level 85, but you can see the rotation moves so fast. It's just so satisfying to play. Well, and we didn't even use Recklessness yet. Let's just go ahead and pop it for good measure. It's got a sick animation too now. It turns you all red and gives you, yeah, just those sweet trails. Oh yeah, one thing I didn't mention is Raging Blow has a nice new animation, and the animation for Rampage now scales with our haste, so we're not chopping off the last little bit of it every time we hit another attack. So yeah, that's the Fury Warrior, guys. If you like this video, if you want to see more content as we continue out of Legion and into Battle for Azeroth, you might want to consider subscribing. We are streaming Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and we'll be having new videos every Tuesday and Thursday. There will be some bonus content mixed in there as well, like this video, which is going to release on a Wednesday. But yeah, that's the Fury Warrior. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you found this helpful. If you did, consider subscribing to the channel. Check us out on Twitch, on Twitter. Join the Discord if you want to, and we're going to have some fun going to Battle for Azeroth together. Until next time, bye-bye.